The Life of Moses, written by our Holy Father among the Saints, the Holy Hierarch, Gregory of Nyssa, Part 1 of Book 2, Contemplation on the Life of Moses, Birth and Childhood. Moses was born at the time Pharaoh issued the decree for male offspring to be destroyed. How shall we, as a matter of choice, imitate this fortuitous birth of Moses? Someone will rightly raise the objection that it does not lie within our power to imitate in our own birth that famous birth. But it is not hard to begin the imitation with this seeming difficulty. Everyone knows that anything placed in a world of change never remains the same, but is always passing from one state to another, the alteration always bringing about some thing better or worse. The narrative is to be understood according to its real intention. For the material and passionate disposition to which human nature is carried when it falls is the female form of life, whose birth is favored by the tyrant. The austerity and intensity of virtue is the male birth, which is hostile to the tyrant and suspected of insurrection against his rule. Now, it is certainly required that what is subject to change be, in a sense, always coming to birth. In mutable nature, nothing can be observed which is always the same. Being born, in the sense of constantly experiencing change, does not come about as the result of external initiative, as is the case with the birth of the body, which takes place by chance. Such a birth occurs by choice. We are in some manner our own parents, giving birth to ourselves by our own free choice, in accordance with whatever we wish to be, whether male or female, moulding ourselves to the teaching of virtue or vice. We can most certainly enter upon a better birth into the realm of light, however much the unwilling tyrant is distressed, and we can be seen with pleasure and be given life by the parents of this goodly offspring, even though it is contrary to the design of the tyrant. The rational faculties are what become the parents of virtue. When we lay bare the hidden meaning of the history, Scripture is seen to teach that the birth which distresses the tyrant is the beginning of the virtuous life. I am speaking of that kind of birth in which free will serves as the midwife, delivering the child amid great pain. For no one causes grief to his antagonist unless he exhibits in himself those marks which give proof of his victory over the other. It is the function of the free will both to beget this virtuous male offspring and to nourish it with proper food, and to take forethought how to save it unharmed from the water. For there are those who present their children to the tyrant, delivering them naked and without forethought to the stream. I am speaking of life as a stream made turbulent by the successive waves of passion, which plunge what is in the stream under the water and drown it. Whenever life demands that the sober and provident rational thoughts, which are the parents of the male child, launch their good child on the billows of this life, they make him safe in an ark, so that when he is given to the stream, he will not be drowned. The ark, constructed out of various boards, would be education in the different disciplines, which holds what it carries above the waves of life. Although he is borne along by the rushing of the waves, the child is not carried far by the tossing of the waters where there is education. Instead, he is washed to the side, and the motion of the waters naturally thrusts him on the firm bank, that is to say, outside the turmoil of life. Experience teaches us that the restless and heaving motion of life thrusts from itself those who do not totally submerge themselves in the deceits of human affairs, and it reckons as a useless burden those whose virtue is annoying. He who escapes from these things must imitate Moses and not spare his tears, even though he should be safe in the ark, for tears are the unfailing guardian of those saved by virtue. Since the daughter of the king, being childless and barren, I think she is rightly perceived as profane philosophy, arranged to be called his mother by adopting the youngster, Scripture concedes that his relationship with her, who was falsely called his mother, should not be rejected until he had recognized his own immaturity. But he who has already attained maturity, as we have learned about Moses, will be ashamed to be called the son of one who is barren by nature. For truly barren is profane education, which is always in labor, but never gives birth. For what fruit worthy of such pangs does philosophy show for being so long in labor. Do not all who are full of wind and never come to term miscarry before they come to the light of the knowledge of God, although they could as well become men if they were not altogether hidden in the womb of barren wisdom? Now, after living with the princess of the Egyptians for such a long time that he seemed to share in their honors, he must return to his natural mother. Indeed, he was not separated from her while he was being brought up by the princess, but was nursed by his mother's milk, as the history states. This teaches, it seems to me, that if we should be involved with profane teachings during our education, we should not separate ourselves from the nourishment of the Church's milk, which would be her laws and customs. By these, the soul is nourished and matured, thus being given the means of ascending the height. It is true that he who looks to both the profane doctrines and to the doctrines of the fathers will find himself between two antagonists. For the foreigner in worship is opposed to the Hebrew teaching and contentiously strives to appear stronger than the Israelite. And so he seems to be to many of the more superficial who abandon the faith of their fathers and fight on the side of the enemy, becoming transgressors of the fathers' teaching. On the other hand, he who is great and noble in soul, like Moses, slays with his own hand the one who rises in opposition to true religion. One may, moreover, find this same conflict in us, for man is set before competitors as the prize of their contest. He makes the one with whom he sides the victor over the other. The fight of the Egyptian against the Hebrew is like the fight of idolatry against true religion, of licentiousness against self-control, of injustice against righteousness, of arrogance against humility, and of everything against what is perceived by its opposite. Moses teaches us by his own example to take our stand with virtue as with a kinsman and to kill virtue's adversary. The victory of true religion is the death and destruction of idolatry. So also injustice is killed by righteousness, and arrogance is slain by humility. The dispute of the two Israelites with each other occurs also in us. There would be no occasion for wicked, heretical opinions to arise unless erroneous reasonings withstood the truth. If, therefore, we by ourselves are too weak to give the victory to what is righteous, since the bad is stronger in its attacks and rejects the rule of truth, we must flee as quickly as possible, in accordance with the historical example, from the conflict to the greater and higher teaching of the mysteries. And if we must again live with a foreigner, that is to say, if need requires us to associate with profane wisdom, let us with determination scatter the wicked shepherds from their unjust use of the wells, which means let us reprove the teachers of evil for their wicked use of instruction. In the same way we shall live a solitary life, no longer entangled with adversaries or mediating between them, but we shall live among those of like disposition and mind who are fed by us, while all the movements of our soul are shepherded, like sheep, by the will of guiding reason. The burning bush. It is upon us who continue in this quiet and peaceful course of life that the truth will shine, illuminating the eyes of our soul with its own rays. This truth, which was then manifested by the ineffable and mysterious illumination which came to Moses, is God. And if the flame by which the soul of the prophet was illuminated was kindled from a thorny bush, even this fact will not be useless for our inquiry. For if truth is God and truth is light, the gospel testifies by these sublime and divine names to the God who made himself visible to us in the flesh. Such guidance of virtue leads us to know that light which has reached down even to human nature. Lest one think that the radiance did not come from a material substance, this light did not shine from some luminary among the stars, but came from an earthly bush, and surpassed the heavenly luminaries in brilliance. From this we learn also the mystery of the Virgin. The light of divinity, which through birth shone from her into human life, did not consume the burning bush, even as the flower of her virginity was not withered by giving birth. That light teaches us what we must do to stand within the rays of the true light. Sandaled feet cannot ascend that height where the light of truth is seen, but the dead and earthly covering of skins, which was placed around our nature at the beginning when we were found naked because of disobedience to the divine will, must be removed from the feet of the soul. When we do this, the knowledge of the truth will result and manifest itself. The full knowledge of being comes about by purifying our opinion concerning non-being. In my view, the definition of truth is this: not to have a mistaken apprehension of being. Falsehood is a kind of impression which arises in the understanding about non-being, as though what does not exist does, in fact, exist. But truth is the sure apprehension of real being. So, whoever applies himself in quietness to higher philosophical matters over a long period of time will barely apprehend what true being is, that is, what possesses existence in its own nature, and what non-being is, that is, what is existence only in appearance, with no self-subsisting nature. It seems to me that at the time the great Moses was instructed in the Theophany, he came to know that none of those things which are apprehended by sense perception and contemplated by the understanding really subsists, but that the transcendent essence and cause of the universe, on which everything depends, alone subsists. For even if the understanding looks upon any other existing things, reason observes in absolutely none of them the self-sufficiency by which they could exist without participating in true being. On the other hand, that which is always the same, neither increasing nor diminishing, immutable to all change, whether to better or to worse, for it is far removed from the inferior and it has no superior, standing in need of nothing else, alone desirable, participated in by all but not lessened by their participation. This is truly real being, and the apprehension of it is the knowledge of truth. In the same way that Moses on that occasion attained to this knowledge, so now does everyone who, like him, divests himself of the earthly covering and looks to the light shining from the bramble bush, that is, to the radiance which shines upon us through this thorny flesh, and which is, as the Gospel says, the true light and the truth itself. A person like this becomes able to help others to salvation, to destroy the tyranny which holds power wickedly, and to deliver to freedom everyone held in evil servitude. The transformation of the right hand and the rod's changing into a snake became the first of the miracles. These seem to me to signify in a figure the mystery of the Lord's incarnation, a manifestation of deity to men which effects the death of the tyrant and sets free those under his power. What leads me to this understanding is the testimony of the prophets and the Gospel. The prophet declares, "This is the change of the right hand of the Most High," indicating that, although the divine nature is contemplated in its immutability, by condescension to the weakness of human nature, it was changed to our shape and form. When the hand of the lawgiver was extended from his bosom, it was changed to an unnatural complexion, and when placed again in his bosom, it returned to its own natural beauty. Again, the only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father is he who is the right hand of the Most High. When he was manifested to us from the bosom of the Father, he was changed to be like us. After he wiped away our infirmities, he again returned to his own bosom the hand which had been among us and had received our complexion. The Father is the bosom of the right hand. What is impassible by nature did not change into what is passable, but what is mutable and subject to passions was transformed into impassibility through its participation in the immutable. The change from a rod into a snake should not trouble the lovers of Christ, as if we were adapting the doctrine of the Incarnation to an unsuitable animal. For the truth himself, through the voice of the Gospel, does not refuse a comparison like this in saying, "And the Son of Man must be lifted up, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert." The teaching is clear, for if the father of sin is called a serpent by Holy Scripture, and what is born of the serpent is certainly a serpent, it follows that sin is synonymous with the one who begot it. But the apostolic word testifies that the Lord was made into sin for our sake 49 by being invested with our sinful nature. This figure therefore is rightly applied to the Lord. For if sin is a serpent and the Lord became sin, the logical conclusion should be evident to all. By becoming sin, he became also a serpent, which is nothing other than sin. For our sake he became a serpent, that he might devour and consume the Egyptian serpents produced by the sorcerers. This done, the serpent was changed back into a rod by which sinners are brought to their senses, and those slackening on the upward and toilsome course of virtue are given rest, the rod of faith supporting them through their high hopes. Only faith can guarantee the blessings that we hope for. He who has some insight into these things right away becomes a god to those who resist the truth, who have been distracted to a material and unsubstantial delusion. They disdain the discussion of being as so much idle talk. As Pharaoh says, "Who is Yahweh, that I should listen to him? I do not know Yahweh." He considered valuable only the material and fleshly things which characterize lives governed by the most irrational sense. If, on the other hand, he had been strengthened by the illumination of the light, and had received such strength and power against his enemies, then, as one who is developed as an athlete by strenuous practice under his trainer, he would boldly and confidently strip for the contest with his opponents. With that rod, the word of faith, in his hand, he would prevail against the Egyptian serpents. The foreign wife will follow him, for there are certain things derived from profane education which should not be rejected when we propose to give birth to virtue. Indeed, moral and natural philosophy may become at certain times a comrade, friend, and companion of life to the higher way, provided that the offspring of this union introduce nothing of a foreign defilement. Since his son had not been circumcised so as to cut off completely everything hurtful and impure, the angel who met them brought the fear of death. His wife appeased the angel when she presented her offspring as pure, by completely removing that mark by which the foreigner was known. I think that if someone who has been initiated under the guidance of the history follow closely the order of the historical figures, the sequence of the development in virtue marked out in our account will be clear. There is something fleshly and uncircumcised in what is taught by philosophy's generative faculty. When that has been completely removed, there remains the pure Israelite race. For example, pagan philosophy says that the soul is immortal. This is a pious offspring. But it also says that souls pass from bodies to bodies and are changed from a rational to an irrational nature. This is a fleshly and alien foreskin. And there are many other such examples. It says there is a God, but it thinks of him as material. It acknowledges him as creator, but says he needed matter for creation. It affirms that he is both good and powerful, but that in all things he submits to the necessity of fate. And one could describe in some detail how good doctrines are contaminated by profane philosophy's absurd additions. When these are completely removed, the angel of God comes to us in mercy, as if rejoicing in the true offspring of these doctrines. The meeting with Aaron. We must return to the sequence in Scripture so that brotherly assistance might come out to meet us as we draw near the conflict with the Egyptians. For we remember the incidents of fighting and quarreling which involved Moses at the beginning of the life of virtue, the Egyptian oppressing the Hebrew, and on another occasion a Hebrew disputing with his countrymen. For the one who has been lifted to the greatest virtue of soul by long training and supernatural illumination on the mountain, it is a friendly and peaceful encounter that takes place when his brother is brought by God to meet him. If this historical incident is taken in a more figurative spiritual sense, it will be found useful for our purpose. For truly the assistance which God gives to our nature is provided to those who correctly live the life of virtue. This assistance was already there at our birth, but it is manifested and made known whenever we apply ourselves to diligent training in the higher life and strip ourselves for the more vigorous contests. So as not to interpret the figures by our own figure, I shall set forth my understanding about this more plainly. There is a doctrine which derives its trustworthiness from the tradition of the fathers, which says that after our nature fell into sin, God did not disregard our fall and withhold his providence. No, on the one hand, he appointed an angel with an incorporeal nature to help in the life of each person, and on the other hand, he also appointed the corrupter who, by an evil and maleficent demon, afflicts the life of man and contrives against our nature. Because man finds himself between these two who have contrary purposes for him, it is in his power to make the one prevail over the other. While the good angel, by rational demonstration, shows the benefits of virtue which are seen in hope by those who live aright, his opponent shows the material pleasures in which there is no hope of future benefits, but which are present, visible, can be partaken of, and enslave the senses of those who do not exercise their intellect. If, then, one should withdraw from those who seduce him to evil, and by the use of his reason turn to the better, putting evil behind him, it is as if he places his own soul, like a mirror, face to face with the hope of good things, with the result that the images and impressions of virtue, as it is shown to him by God, are imprinted on the purity of his soul. Then his brother brings him assistance and joins him, for the angel, who in a way is a brother to the rational and intellectual part of man's soul, appears, as I have said, and stands by us whenever we approach the Pharaoh. If, while trying to parallel completely the historical account to the sequence of such intellectual contemplation, someone should somehow discover something in the account which does not coincide with our understanding, he should not reject the whole enterprise. He should always keep in mind our discussion's goal, to which we are looking while we relate these details. 74. We have already said in our prologue that the lives of honored men would be set forth as a pattern of virtue for those who come after them. Those who emulate their lives, however, cannot experience the identical literal events. For how could one again find the people multiplying during their sojourn in Egypt? And how again find the tyrant who enslaves the people and bears hostility to male offspring, and allows the feminine and weaker to grow in numbers? And how again find all the other things which Scripture includes? Because therefore it has been shown to be impossible to imitate the marvels of these blessed men in these exact events. One might substitute a moral teaching for the literal sequence in those things which admit of such an approach. In this way, those who have been striving toward virtue may find aid in living the virtuous life. If the events require dropping from the literal account anything written which is foreign to the sequence of elevated understanding, we pass over this on the grounds that it is useless and unprofitable to our purpose, so as not to interrupt his guidance to virtue at such points. I say these things concerning the interpretation of Aaron, in order to anticipate the objection which will arise from what follows in the narrative. For someone will say that there is no doubt that the angel does share kinship with the soul in its intellectual and incorporeal aspects, that it already existed before our creation, and that it is allied with those engaged in the fight against the adversary, but that it is not right to see Aaron, who led the Israelites in the worship of idols, as a type of the angel. To him we shall reply, passing over the sequence, with the point already made, that what falls outside our purpose is not to overthrow the agreement which exists elsewhere. Moreover, both words, brother and angel, are alike applicable in the meaning they might have to opposite things. For angel signifies not only an angel of God, but also an angel of Satan, and we call brother not only a good brother, but also a bad brother. So the Scripture speaks of the good. Brothers are proved in distress, and of the opposite, every brother will utterly supplant.